Zach, you want to talk a little bit about some of the issues surrounding licensed games?
First off, I champion licensed games set around, books, movies, TV shows. I think, well, first of all, I think it's a great gateway into role-playing games other than just Dungeons and Dragons. Because everybody's heard of Dungeons and Dragons, and sometimes that doesn't, do it for people in terms of role-playing games. But if you suddenly see that, your favorite book, you can, take an active role in, engaging with it, that can be very exciting. It was Wondering Lord of the Rings. But I think they bring a lot of people into the hobby, which is good. And also, as we've talked about before, complex worlds. I mean, it's nice to have, if you're saying, I'm playing Song of Ice and Fire, and you get people together, everyone shows up at the table with an expectation of what the world is like, the tone of the game, which eliminates a lot of kind of that awkwardness, even amongst brand new players who don't know anything about role-playing games. They can still show up like, okay, here's how things kind of work. I've read this book. I've seen this movie. I have this idea of what the world is like and how I should go about things.
It might even help with that, like, awkward first scene of how we meet each other. Like, because if they've seen Game of Thrones, then they'd be like, oh, well, how about, like, we're traveling on the road and we run it, and you guys are, like, some soldiers from, one side in the war, and we're going to come into your campsite and sit down in front of the fire and share some food. Because
it gives you ideas for what scenes are like and what people do in the world, which can be really hard sometimes.
Yes. It gives you, as Scott, you were saying, idea of what scenes. Also, especially with, film and television, you also then have ideal music for ideal points you're trying to express if you want to use any of that.
True.
Which is very fun.
The only issue I ever see with playing in a licensed world is when there are major characters, like, dealing with how you have those characters introduced.
This is like a good point. So if you're playing in the world of Star Wars, does Luke Skywalker show up? Like, wouldn't he come and save the day? Like, is Darth Vader going to be the big enemy? And if so, like, doesn't that kind of, why do the player characters need to exist then if Luke Skywalker and Han Solo are still, like, kicking around in the galaxy? Oh, Josh, you have a solution to this, right?
Well, I mean, Luke Skywalker, remember, he doesn't really want to help out, as in the last movie, until, like, the end.
Yeah, he gave up.
Not counting that. Do I have a solution? I mean, I try not to have them around. The worst thing in the world, and I think I've experienced this probably before, is like, okay, you walk into, like, Han Solo's office, and he's like, okay, guys, you guys are some raw recruits. We need you to go fly and make this delivery to this planet and pick up this person and save them. Okay, Thank you, Han Solo. You're way cooler than us. We will never be as cool as you, Han Solo.
Yeah. That's the worst, right? Because it makes it so that the players are not like the main characters in the story. They don't really, it's really just there to kind of set up for how cool these other characters are. And it's not the players setting their own agendas and pursuing their own goals. It's just like these other main characters that are driving the world.
And there have been intellectual properties where the property holders, I won't name names, but where the property rights holders like said, oh no, this particular character or this particular thing needs to be in the game. So it's in the game. But I mean, what makes a good book doesn't always make a good role-playing game.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading the old school King Arthur Pendragon game, and there's like a whole Pendragon campaign, which goes through like the entire story of Merlin. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, I'd really like to play a game focused around like knights and knighthood, just like very specifically. And I was really excited for that. And it's this really old game from the 80s. So a lot of this can be chalked up to kind of games at the time. But I was reading through it, and it's kind of like you said, like, okay, Merlin is going to go get the sword from the lake, and he tells you to come help him fight a monster on the way. And then while you're fighting the monster, he goes and gets the sword. And like, the whole thing is like that. Like, you're just kind of a side character to the story of King Arthur. And it's like, that's not fun. Like, I want to play a game where like we are the Knights of the Round Table and we take it whatever direction we want. Like,
okay. Zach, you got something? I have a challenge for you guys after this.
Mm-hmm.
I will agree with that. Some games are like that. Like I've read Pendragon, and it's very much. I mean, it's really cool. The whole idea of knights and everything. But when I started reading it, it's like, oh, it very much shoehorns the players into being the NPCs in, you know, King Arthur and his stories. I mean, no matter the game really sets it up for me. I mean, no matter how important you are, no matter what you do, you'll never outshine Galahad, Lancelot, and friends.
Mm-hmm.
The most you can be is like the B team, the Knights of the Oval Table,
the other guys.
Room. And I mean,
that's so lame.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case with all. I mean, games in established universes. I think that's just a case for Pendragon.
Mm-hmm.
I think Greg Stafford was very much trying to write a game that he really wanted to play. Not really that had mass appeal, but I mean, it's still popular. It's in stores now, the current edition.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
I think the game itself can be fine, I think. It's just like that old classic campaign, just the way it was written.
Yeah.
So are you able to play the game without doing that?
I mean,
No.
yes. I think I got the really old edition, so it was kind of made to be like, this is the Pendragon campaign. I think it was a separate book, actually. So you had like a core book that was just, you know, like a regular RPG core book, but then they say, okay, this is like the canonical campaign. So you can play it with just the core book and make your own story, presumably. I don't know that much about it.
Okay. I mean, because the book is so beautiful, I just want it really hard.
Yeah, that's the reason why I wanted to buy it. But with the Star Wars thing, I mean, here's how I see it. There's like what I think I've read that there's 1 million planets on the Star Wars galaxy, and I mean, Luke Skywalker and friends can only be on one of those. So in theory, there are 999,000 some odd other planets where you could be doing your own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, and again, it also falls in that this is a game. If you want to, you know, if you're on Dantooine, and you're engaged, you know, in this really tense firefight with some stormtroopers, and you're trying to get away with some smuggled goods, you're going to be focused on fighting those stormtroopers and smuggling those goods out, not what Luke Skywalker is doing wherever the hell he is.
So you think it's like a non-issue as long as you don't push them straight into contact with the main characters from the IP. I have a challenge. Go ahead.
I mean, they could still be fun. I liked, especially with licensed games, I'd like to like throw in big characters because that can just be just a fun, like, oh, we met Gandalf or something, or that can be fun, but not like take the shine. Like Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game has stats for all the major characters, and I'm like, I'm not gonna have the mountain just run in and just massacre the party. But it'd be like if you like were in the Red Keep and you met Tyrion offhand. That could be a little fun thing to like actually like mechanically banter words with him, or to like joust, like say you're into a tournament and like you like joust with Loras. That could just be like a fun little moment, like I did that, and then that's all you hear of them.
I mean, yeah, that could be kind of interesting, you know, although the players could also be like, hey, if we see anybody from the books, we're going to, like, let's agree, we're going to kill them. And that could be funny. But tell me, all right, so I challenge you still, man. So tell me, this is the challenge. We're going to play A Song of Ice and Fire. Tell me how you're going to make it interesting, because the existing plots of the existing houses, I think it'd be really difficult to try to make something interesting inside there that it's too dominant. How are you going to do it? Tell me how you do it. The overall plot that you're going to run, how you do it.
Well, I mean, the game does address that. It doesn't just say, oh, you're just a side character. It's about, so, I mean, there's not just 7 houses. There's hundreds of houses in Westeros, and they're all vying with each other for power over each other. So, I mean, amongst the lesser houses, which can still be pretty powerful, like the Boltons, there's still a lot of conflict you can have amongst, your neighbors and this and that. So basically, imagine like the actual Middle Ages. Every lord was trying to screw over the guy next to him.
Sure, I agree with you, but the problem is like then you still got the Starks and the Lannisters, and they're overshadowing everything. Or do you have that going on in the background, or do you just turn Cersei and Robb Stark and Ned Stark off and just have them be basically not really doing anything? Do you take the war out?
I mean, the war's there. The base game has it only 3 years into King Robert's reign. So that's 10 years before the start of a Game of Thrones.
So they turn everybody off, basically.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, the early part of the War of Five Kings, it also mentions playing it in other eras, like even doing like an Age of Heroes game, where it's just there's like a pair. I mean, Age of Heroes it's like when the White Walkers first came and when there was actual 7 kingdoms, and then, I mean, also if you could just splat it down your campaign right in some random year. I mean,
well, could you build another house and have it be more powerful than the Starks and the Lannisters?
I mean, mechanically wise, yes. If you get enough points and your house can invest enough things, you can.
Well, like game wise, does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it does.
How do you make sure? Because this is my point, I guess. We're gonna play the game. I don't want to play some scrubby little tiny house, I want to play one of the major players so I can have the experience of being like Tyrion with like, having all that power because I'm smart, or being Cersei and having all that power because of whatever, and or being Olenna and having all that power because I've got all the money and crops in the Reach and stuff like that.
So I've seen a solution to this, not in Game of Thrones, but in a Star Wars game I played that was great. And it took place in like a New Hope setting. And the DM is just like, all right, Luke Skywalker doesn't exist. You guys are the main characters of the story. Like the Emperor and Darth Vader are still out there doing stuff, but the things that you do will change the course of history. And so he introduced a plot hook that essentially down the line, like changed the world as a whole and the relationships with everything. It dealt with like a Sith army from like ancient times frozen in carbonite that got woken up. So now there's this like other faction. And so Darth Vader and the Emperor and stuff are still out there, but because of the actions of the players, what they're doing now is actually different. And like the world scene has shifted. So it's good because you still know enough about Star Wars to know how things start out, but you also don't know how things are going to turn out because it says like, okay, this is just an alternate history where now you guys are the main characters.
I like that because like that's basically switching off Luke Skywalker and saying he just stayed on his farm.
Mm-hmm. But everything else is still cool. And it's an interesting thought experiment because it's like, well, I guess Han Solo would still be just like a ruffian rogue who never really gets his heart of gold. So like we ran into him in some mission and he like betrayed us and we're like, okay, that's kind of neat. And we never saw him again. That was it. With Game of Thrones, I feel like it's harder because the setting is so dense and there's so many players, right? And it's like, I guess you could, if you just say, all right, like, I don't know. I forget exactly how we sort of made a house in A Song of Ice and Fire roleplay.
Yeah.
We talked about it. So you kind of already are making the history a little different.
But we played a minor house. We probably were like.
I mean, even when they say minor houses, they're still really, really powerful. I mean, like the Red Wines, the Boltons,
The phrase.
The phrase that they're. I mean, lesser and greater really only implies to. It has nothing to do with how actually powerful you are. It just implies the greater houses were the 7 who were actual kings in the past. Mm-hmm. So I mean, and a lot of times if you look at like the actual Middle Ages, the greater houses, your liege lords, they really couldn't care what you're doing as long as you're not upsetting the status quo that much. I mean, a lot of the times these lords were just kind of left to do whatever with their lands and their neighbors.
Yeah, I mean, an easy approach to this problem is to just say like, all right, we're just gonna have a small house over here where there's nothing that's gonna touch the main setting, and so you don't have to worry about like conflicts of canon or whatever. Like you could do that, but that doesn't really interest me as much because it's like I want to affect the whole world. I don't want to play like I don't know, like
Scrub.
Yeah, like a Karstark or something. Like I want to play Jaime Lannister or like Ned Stark. I want to play characters that do that. So I like the idea of using a setting just to determine how the board is set at the beginning. But then as soon as play starts, like, all right, this is alternate history now. The things you guys do will affect how things go. Like maybe Jaime Lannister is going to get killed after the first session, and then like some unknown house is going to rise up. Like I feel like if you want the canon to stay put, and you say, all right, well, we can't do this because that will affect these future events. Like you're not playing to find out what happens. Like it's already predetermined. So like.
Yeah, like the Solo movie, where like, well, I know he doesn't die, I know Lando doesn't die, so I guess these other people, I don't care about them because they're not going to make it.
Mm.
I mean, so if that's the case, what I'd like to do, I mean, I'm not someone who's like, no, this is how the books happen. How I would set it is I would have the campaign set like height of the War of Five Kings. The whole of Westeros is in a shit show, and like right after like the Red Wedding.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, oh, anyone who's got enough dudes could really, do.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool. You're really smart, Zach. So like, you've actually killed off a lot of the main characters with the Red Wedding.
Because I mean, then I can just. I mean, a lot of people are dead. I can just populate just the area around you with a whole bunch of just made up houses or.
Yeah, and like it's okay. I think it's okay to keep the villains. I mean, Darth Vader and the Emperor are still great villains. They don't ruin it by having them in the game. If anything, it makes it better. So you could keep, Cersei Lannister in the game. You're just getting rid of the Starks and the other people that might overshadow the heroes, the PCs.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Starks are still technically there. I think at their Red Wedding. I can't remember, but I mean, it's more so there's the power vacuum. That's the big thing. So it's like, oh, well, this is how it is, but this new house that we pin on the map, they're gonna do something really cool, which will probably involve horrible things to other people.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, because I remember we had a unit of like 60 Serial Pharrell style water dancers.
Oh yeah, we had this joke. There's a bunch of dudes in a phalanx with all their fancy outfits and little swords, being like "hup hoo hoo hoo," in like the middle of a battlefield.
We have to play that now.
Yeah,
you realize we have to revive those characters.
I like the house character creation rules are a little intensive, but once you have a house, it feels really real because you design like a sigil and like a motto and like a culture
and like a history.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a guy called Lord of Dogs. I really liked him. He was like the kennel master.
Oh yeah.
He was like basically a terrible little man.
I had a really interesting dynamic the first time I played it. We just played the adventure from the back.
Peril at King's Landing.
Yeah, Peril at King's Landing. And they were like brothers, but like one of them secretly like hated the other. Because like the older brother was kind of like this kind of frail, talky. He wasn't good at fighting. He was a non-dwarf Tyrion basically, and the other guy was just this grim. The younger brother was this grim, gruff guy, and he like resented him his whole life for always having to just be the second son and always actually swinging the swords and defending the family with violence, while the older brother just got everything. I thought it was a really interesting dynamic, but it never really. The game kind of died, so we never really got to realize that or got to the point where like one.
Yeah, a cool thing that making a house does is it gets you to talk to each other about what your characters are and what their relationship is, and it's cool because it doesn't actually codify this. I don't think it really tells you to do this, but you inevitably be like, "Oh, what's your relationship to the house? How do I feel about you?" And you build these sort of Games of Thronesy like tense relationships. Like me and Josh's character, I think we were related. You were like my adopted brother or something.
I think
but it was kind of a similar thing where you were like this world traveler guy who's kind of this dilettante, and I was like this like way too serious, like warlike young.
You're like like a Mormon.
Yeah.
Hard working.
That's cool. Like I love how that works, and I love the kind of things that it puts out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming the game they have. It's not like Penrose like you're forced. I'm assuming they've laid the roots for the canon to be. I'm not going to say completely broken, but bent quite a bit. Because even if you look at like the virtues and the various like, I want to use the term feats, but feats. Mm-hmm. You can be a Kingsguard if you want. It's on the list.
That's cool.
You can be a Kingsguard. You can be a brother of the Night's Watch. it says that these things come with like heavy discretion, but
That's interesting.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
you could actually have a group of like one night watchman, one former or member knight errant of the Knights Guard of the King's Guard and stuff like that. And they're on a mission to do something.
Hmm.
I can see that working. I'd say so in general. You keep the villains and try to turn off the heroes in the IPs.
I think that's a good policy. I mean, really, you just don't want the heroes of the story showing up and overshadowing the main characters, because in a game, the main characters are the heroes of the story.
Yeah.
And two, also, like, there's this bit of writing advice that I heard from Yahtzee Croshaw. He's like a game reviewer on YouTube, but a piece of writing advice he had was like, if you're telling a story about a character, is this the most important point in this character's life? And if not, are you showing us that? And I think that can be extrapolated to like, if you're showing us this world, is this the most important series of events in this world? And if not, why are you showing us that? So like, I think that applies to role-playing games here. If you say, all right, we're going to play, this is kind of a thing that, I mean, I love One Ring, and I know you love One Ring, Zach, too, but I feel like an inherent problem with that is like, the biggest thing in Middle Earth is the War of the Ring. Like, everything is so important in that. The world kind of exists around this event. And so it's kind of weird to have other characters who aren't involved in that. You can still tell good stories about it, but it's weird to be in a world in which you're kind of not the most important thing to ever happen in that world. And I think it doesn't always have to be like that. You can play games where you're like little schmucks just trying to make your way. But for something like epic fantasy, I feel like that's pretty important.
What do you do? Talk to us, Zach.
I think it'll be probably touched on. I mean, I haven't even thought about how to handle the War of the Ring, because the actual War of the Ring is very much a flash in the pan. It's the very last year of the like 80, 90 year window that you play the game in. So I'm assuming that there will be some kind of, eventually just some kind of coverage of like, how does this, if you're playing from the start date to the end of the War of the Ring, how do you handle the War of the Ring? Because there's got to be, I mean, they don't show it in any of the movies, but it is a very global event. It's not just Sauron marching his orcs to Minas Tirith. They also go out of Dol Guldur. They go to Lake Town. So basically the entire world is affected simultaneously. So they're definitely, especially if you're playing in Wilderland, it doesn't really touch on what happens there, but they definitely get the chance to be the hero. But I really haven't even thought about it. That would probably do something like that, or either like maybe not having them be at the battle, but going to do something that affects how the battle turns out.
Yeah.
Like, no, just they didn't even know what that is. But like, try and like find something.
I said, so what would you do? Like, get the One Ring and take it to Mount Doom?
Mm-hmm.
Zach?
You could. I wouldn't do that. I would.
That would be lame.
It would be, but I would have them like a really good way is the end of the Darkening of Mirkwood campaign is, so basically it's got like a set ending, because it mentions in the end of the appendix of Lord of the Rings that, you know, when Elrond and Elro here go to like Radagast's house to see if he wants to come to the party at Rivendell, he's gone. You can't find him. The region is incredibly depopulated. So basically,
I think we've lost Zach.
Oh no.
He's slowed down anyway. I'm interested to hear how this turns out.
Yeah. Oh, you back?
I don't know. There he is. Zach, we lost you for a minute.
Oh.
So can you just start with that Radagast is gone? They say, can you just start that part over again? Radagast.
Yeah. So the appendix of Lord of the Rings, when they have the Council of Elrond, they go to invite Radagast. And Elrond's sons, they go to, tell him and pick him up. But when they get to the Eves of Mirkwood, where all him and all the woodmen live, he's gone, and just the region is been almost completely depopulated. And it's never explained why. So the whole point of the campaign basically explains why that happens. And, in the end, you have other options. You can, lead the woodman away. You can take their magic lamp that protected them back to Elrond because it's technically his. Or what I think is the best option and the most cinematic is you can try and gather as many people as you can to march on Dol Guldur in a hopes to, one final attack to break it. And I mean, it explicitly states that it's a suicide mission. There's no way to sneak out of dying. The orcs, they march out and they start, but depending on how well the battle goes can affect how the women are affected from, it's like in the book where Radagast is gone and they're depopulated, or if you do well enough, it's you break the power of Dol Guldur and the woodmen keep their homes and their families and things like that. So I would do something like that to couple the War of the Rings. I would have them do, gather allies and do some kind of, side mission, which depending on how well they did, I mean, I wouldn't make it a complete suicide mission, but depending on how well they did will affect like the outcome of how like the battle of like Lake Town and Erebor goes.
What do you think, Scott?
Cool. I think that makes sense. I like this idea that, so you're suggesting that you can actually kind of change a small piece of the canon in Lord of the Rings, or will this take place after kind of Elrond's sons discover that Mirkwood is empty?
Well, I would say we could change part of the aspects. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, Middle Earth, there's a lot of established things, but there's also a lot of very gray areas.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Tolkien was. So, I mean, it leaves you, I mean, despite everybody says about, there's other characters and the One Ring, the titular One Ring, there still is a lot of room for flexibility. Because, I mean, a lot of Middle Earth is really a blank canvas.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much of Middle Earth do you see in the movies other than like Edoras, Minas Tirith, Helm's Deep that isn't just, this brief 30-second panoramic shot of New Zealand?
Yeah.
You're totally right. Yeah. Most of it's not in the movies or anything.
And even in the books, a lot of it is just this like brief, even a lot of it stuff that doesn't even make it into the book. It's just brief mentions at the end of Return of King. There's this very vast appendix of, lineages and histories and things like that. And a lot of things just make very, one sentence entries into that.
Mm-hmm.
I think
I feel like you could
go ahead.
You could easily tell a story like The Hobbit, where it's really just about this group of people who really want this one thing, and you could just make up a new Erebor with a new kind of reason that it's gone, and just like, because they have this big globetrotting thing, but they don't really affect the world other than Erebor, right? Like they're not, I don't know, going and like slaying the Balrog and stuff. They just kind of like bumble through stuff and they get to Erebor and they bring it back and that's it. And if you just make up an Erebor, you can have a story like that. Like,
I mean, yeah,
easy.
I think that falls into the basic, storytelling of that. It's like pick a place, pick a reason. I mean, very much One Ring's about the journey.
Mm-hmm.
With your friends. I mean, you could easily just tell The Hobbit. There's a gajillion and one. There's a bunch of other dwarf holds in the mountains that, there was a big war. The dragons came and everything and smashed everything. But now there's other dragons. There's other dwarf holds that could be reclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
Other treasure, other big hairy woodsmen who have houses you can make a pit stop at.
Yeah.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, like, for example, I don't know if you guys ever watched The Expanse, but that's like another very popular IP. There's going to be a game coming out, and I was thinking about how to run a game in that world, and it's pretty easy because you've got Earth, they don't like Mars too much, and then you've got the asteroid belt, and those people kind of don't like Earth or Mars very much. So you've already got like these kind of like factions. They're straining at one another, and you can just drop the players kind of in anywhere until they mess one of them up, which is a bit like Scum and Villainy the other night.
Yeah.
You're basically the characters are basically there to cause trouble between the factions.
That's cool. So it just sets up this powder keg and you can just drop people in and see what happens.
Yeah. So I see that works because the overall characters in that story maybe are not as heroic. Another IP example would be something like Dune.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could
Also has a game coming out soon. Has
yeah.
there been a Dune game in the past? Wasn't there one?
Yeah, there was. Chronicles of the Imperium came out. I want to say it's 2000. It's kind of laid out in a very 2000s, late 90s, 2000s way, and it's so it's kind of hard to read and stuff like that. And it basically they say you should create a minor house.
Interesting.
I thought you said Doom.
Dune.
Doom, the old video game. Boy, that'd
Sounds
be
like a real fun. I'm like, oh, it sounds like a real fun beer and pretzels RPG. There's a lot of just drinking and just throwing dice.
that
And
sounds cool.
shooting aliens.
You could do that as what's the Warhammer game where you shoot everybody? Where you're Space Marines? A kill squad?
That describes like the whole universe. And
That's everything.
like
Well, there's one based around, it's an RPG, right, where you just kill stuff. I don't know. If you,
Deathwatch.
that's
that,
it.
I'm sad that those physical books are so expensive because I've had so much fun with Deathwatch. Like it is a good. It's there's a lot of options, but you could make the most optimal angry 8-foot tall killer. I put a tech priest, which was really fun last time. I was full Iron Heart because like, what's your special thing? It's like I have my second heart is actually a fake heart made of iron.
That's cool.
Like claw, like servo. I didn't have the full like servo harness. I had like 2 claws and like a chainsaw and like a plasma cutter. But it was fun. That's a good shoot 'em up game.
So I guess that's it. And so we'll see everybody next time. Bye.
See you, everybody.
See ya.